All right, so in weightlifting, we have two competitive exercises or movements, the snatch and the clean and jerk. To train them, there's a high level of skill involved, which means that you have to have regular contact time with those movements. The weights that you do that at do not have to be high. We know that if you just practice those things at light weights, you will eventually be able to do them at heavy weights when the time comes. The most important thing is that that technique and movement is at an acceptable level. So when you load, that it's still good, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, in terms of strength training for weightlifting, there's a couple of things that you just need to take into account. Mainly, we're looking at the concentric phase of a squat. So we're looking at making those legs push upwards, right? When we look at the midline, we're looking at dissipating the load. So as we pull or as we squat or as we jerk or whatever movement you're doing, we're training a certain level of stability through those movements. So that's how we train that. And then lastly, the upper body, we're mainly working on isometric and eccentric strength. We don't have to be a strong presser to be a good Olympic lifter. All you have to do is be a strong catcher, right? So you need to be able to catch weights overhead in a very stacked and sound position. So if we simplify that to its basis, you're doing squats with potentially a bounce, you're doing midline core accessories, so things like holds, holds, back extensions, maybe a couple of pulls here and there, and then with the overhead stuff, mainly things like overhead squats, jerks, maybe some push presses if you're really, really weak, but you're gonna leave things like strict press and stuff on the table because you don't need them as much if we're simplifying things, all right? Now, if we layer onto that things like the power lifts.
Do you agree with that? Do you think that you can leave something like strict press on the table?
I think you can. Do I think you should is a different story.
How much do you think that being able to press out of that front rack position is important for shoulder health?
For shoulder health, actually, I don't think it's that important. I think you can strict press a baseline level, like 50% of your body weight, and be able to jerk big weights still.
Okay.
I think I would rather be able to strict press my body weight or more, but I'm just trying to
simplify it as much as you can.
Because we have too many things to work on in this scenario.
Two.
Right? Two. Snatch question.
Yeah.
But I mean, like when I start layering on,
I know, I'm taking the piss. Yeah.
squats, if we look at the power lifts, the competitive lifts are squats, bench, deadlift. With the squats, we're now developing a higher load. Potentially we're low bar squatting. Now we need a high level of eccentric strength. So we've gone from just that concentric only phase to adding that eccentric in as well in terms of training, because that is going to be a little bit slower because we're moving absolute weights now. We're not trying to move weights easily. We're trying to move heavy weights. Right? And because we've done that, that's going to add a certain level of load and fatigue. Whereas before, with a weightlifting style squat, you can weightlifting style squat like pretty often. But if you start doing this powerlifting style squat, it's going to get quite tough. With our midline, we're now having to, again, pull heavy weights. So we've gone from having to work on just having that static strength through our midline to actually being, to actually like pulling off the ground quite heavy, which means that we've got to start adding that concentric phase into there as well. And then with the pressing,
are you talking about through the midline?
Through the midline, as in like through the glutes and like the distal and proximal ends of your midline, right? And then with the pressing, now we're adding that concentric in as well because we have to actually start training the presses, bench press in particular. Again, you could probably argue that strict press can be left on the table, but now because we're trying to keep that shoulder joint healthy, because you're doing jerks and bench press, you probably should be adding some strict presses in there. All right? And that's how I look at strength training for SuperTotal. Now to add fitness in there.
How much posterior pulling do you need, like upper body, like rowing and that sort of thing, purely from either from a stability point of view for the overhead position,
Yeah.
for retraction during bench press as well, and for shoulder health as well?
I think those things are super important.
Yeah.
But you can focus on them through the next bit of it. So like that's what I would add into their aerobic capacity
Okay.
if they're trying to do everything at once.
So you wouldn't have someone rowing for strength?
No, they would be rowing for strength, but I would add those into like a Metcon or something, like ring rows or
Okay.
pull-ups. Even though I'm almost 100% sure I've said to you on this podcast, never do ring rows in a Metcon. Or like some sort of gymnastics training.
Yeah.
Actually, no, I think they do need to do pull-ups and rows in their strength training.
Do you think there's any benefit to maximally loading rows and pull-ups and stuff?
Yeah,
Yeah.
there is.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's...
Like, would you ever do a 1RM prone row, for example?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't think it's very beneficial if you're just looking at it as a shoulder health. No, there is no benefit.
To doing a 1RM prone row? No.
Because what are we trying to do with these rows? We're trying to add stability for the competitive lifts.
Yep, but do you believe that if they are overall absolute strength is weak through those pulling muscles,
Yeah.
those rowing muscles, that even from a shoulder health point of view, the fact that your pressing muscles are so strong is going to cause that kyphotic curve?
Again, the movement comes before the prescription or exercise, because what you're adding into that is like a row for no reason, like a heavy row for no reason. Like their posture and the way they press or their pain or discomfort should dictate the programming.
But shouldn't you be trying to preempt those things rather than waiting for it to be an issue?
Yeah, but like you could achieve the same thing with a 5 or an 8.
Yeah.
Like
Okay.
I don't think you need to do a 1 or even a 3.
Yep.
Does that kind of
Yeah.
answer that question?
Yeah. Do you need to do any percentage-based work with?
With rows?
Rowing
Like,
movements?
do you think do you think your push should be a percentage of your pull? Is that what you're getting at?
No, I don't think there's an exact number. I think you're right in saying that it's movement-based. It needs to be movement-based.
Because
But I guess
the guys that James Newbury used to work with, they used to always put up these weird ratios.
Yeah.
Like
you had a thing for those for a little while though.
I did go through a phase of that, and then
Yeah.
I realized it was silly.
I guess more what I'm saying is so that if you are programming for an athlete that maybe struggles with adherence, for example, you can give someone a percentage-based piece for their rowing movement. So you can say, I want you to prone row 4 sets of 8 reps at 60%
Of their prone row or of their bench?
of their prone row.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, do you think there's a benefit to having that number there? Or would you ever bother getting that number? If you would you get that number using like an estimated max of a 5RM, for example? Or do you just not care and want, as long as people are doing 4 sets of 8, the load is less important?
No, I understand where you're getting at, because what you end up with is someone doing 4 sets of 8 with 40 kilos,
When they could row 65 kilos.
70 kilos or 80 kilos, and then benching like 150.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think there is a huge benefit to having percentage-based rows, or at least having a coach's eye or the athlete understand
Yeah.
that rowing heavy is important.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're 100% right.
Do you think from a functionality point of view, there's really any point in ever doing prone rows? Like a supported row?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like prone rows.
Yep.
I think it's really, like, once you take out the core musculature and the legs out of it, it makes it really hard to row.
Yeah, 100%. But do you think that because everything that you do in life or from a competitive sense in those
supported.
movements is not supported.
Yeah.
Like, it's self-supported, right, from your own static holds throughout the trunk and the legs.
Yeah.
Is there any point in taking all that out of it just to focus on the musculature?
Yeah, it could be diagnostic.
Yep.
Could really show you something. You know how we talked about someone that's not able to disassociate their lats or hip flexors from their midline? Same thing.
Other way around.
Other way around.
Yeah.
Like, what if they can't stop gripping through their midline?
Yeah.
Or they can't stop using their glutes?
Yeah.
You know, you could have people that do things the opposite way.
Yep.
And that's a good way of teaching them not to. Or if you have someone that's like super trappy and you just want to lower the weight so that they can, you know, actually
Speaking
use
of
their
super
rhomboids
trappy.
or lats, or are you super trappy?
I'm super trappy sitting here now. I'm
Oh,
like,
really? Do you want to stand up instead?
No.
Do a standing podcast.
we need a very desk. Anyway, fitness dudes. Go.
Yeah, and then layering on the fitness on top is the hard bit, because you have all this time that you need to be spending on snatches and clean and jerks, squats, benches, and deadlifts, and we don't want to have to do them in an aerobic way, because then we're not getting the technical component of training them. It's very difficult to do that, unless you're proficient already. If you're highly proficient in those movements, then you might be able to add them into Metcons. You might be able to do, if you're less proficient, then we go into things like EMOMs, or every 2 minutes, because you still get a fitness, you're still getting some sort of fitness from doing those in that way. And then if you're least proficient, you have to do them completely separate. And then get your accessory work in through the Metcons. So sled pushes for legs, air squats, wall balls, those sort of things, lunges, those movements. For your bench accessories, things like push-ups, ring rows, pull-ups, all of that. And then everything else in between, all the other CrossFit movements, just to add those in. So that's the baseline for the structure of like how you think about things, but the actual prescription has to happen over like a 12-week period. What do you think about what I've said so far?
Good, really good. I agree. Yeah, I know. I'm looking at the time as well. I'll try and be quick.
You can go and I'll finish off.
No, okay. I agree with what you've said about what's important, what's not important. I think something that needs to be thought about that maybe you've skipped over for CrossFit, if he's adding that in, and also just general well-being. And this is something that I've looked a lot at recently, just out of interest, is energy, make sure you're focusing on energy systems as well. So not necessarily just, so I think most of your like really short bursts are pretty well covered just in general training, like your type 2B fibers, so like your super fast twitch fibers, and your glycolytic, anaerobic glycolytic, yeah. So your fastest energy system, like your 10-second energy system, is pretty well covered via just doing weightlifting.
Yeah.
And then you have like your lactic acid system, which you need to approach somehow as well. And then you have an aerobic system, which you need to approach somehow as well. 2 and 3 interlink quite well, being that, yes, they're separate systems. In one is anaerobic and one is aerobic. Anaerobic being doesn't require oxygen for the use of energy, for the production of energy, and aerobic being uses an oxidative breakdown of substrates to derive more energy. Yeah, they're quite closely related because you can have both happening at the same time. It's very hard to have an aerobic system in play while you're using an ATP system, like an ATP PC, which is your adenosine triphosphate phosphocreatine system, which is your first system, your quick, fast release. It's using purely stored energy.
Basically anything under 10 seconds.
Anything under 10 seconds, most people less. Yeah, Usain Bolt would be in that system his whole 100 meter. He would be out of it in the back end of his 200, just. There's very little, if any, anaerobic activity taking place while this is happening. It's too short, it's only using stored energy. The body doesn't give a shit at this point about making more energy. It's only using stored stuff. So in this function, there's very little actual energy production taking place. Second one. In the second one, lactic acid system, a little bit longer. It's still anaerobic. There's ways of creating more energy during this without the use of oxygen. However, you're very rarely going to be in this system without at least some sort of play from the aerobic system. The aerobic system is going to be happening at
And so
some
that's
point.
anywhere from that sort of 10 seconds to
About
3
3 minutes,
Yeah.
yeah. So they're very interrelated, especially in CrossFit, I find, because in CrossFit, I think there are stages in a workout where you're going to move in and out of dominance in those two systems. Depending on the movement, let's say you're doing a couplet of rowing and muscle ups, okay? Every time you get on the pull-up bar, you're probably going to slide back into an anaerobic system. Yeah. There's significantly more fast twitch fibers taking place, being used, which generally, when you fast twitch fibers are what's being used, they're a lot more anaerobic than they are aerobic. And then when you're on the rower, you're probably going to be in a much more aerobic system, which is allowing that anaerobic system to recover for when you get back on the bar muscle ups. So I think you need to think about the different energy systems that are going to be in play during training. As I said, I think you can kind of leave that ATP PC system out of it. Like, I'm not a huge fan of doing, when you're doing something like 10-second airdyne sprints, you're generally looking at that system, but you're more looking at the use of the other systems to recover that system before you get back into your next 10-second sprint. I think as far as fast outlay of energy, you do enough of that just by doing a clean and jerk.
Yeah.
Or doing a deadlift. When training, I think that you can't, so this is where I'm getting at with what you were saying, you can't just look at the using accessory movements and stuff in fitness. There needs to be purely like base building fitness as well, which is you can't put any accessory movements in there because there's too much skill, and it requires too much musculature as well, which means that you're going to slide out of that aerobic system. And I think the aerobic system is super important to have that base there because, as I said, it's important for recovering the other two systems.
Yeah.
So the aerobic system is allowing you to build up more stored ATP. It's much slower at doing it, but it's much more effective. It's not more effective, that's probably the wrong word. It's much slower, but it can happen more continuously. Yeah. You can't use that system when going fast.
Yes.
So it's important to think about, from a CrossFit point of view, you still need to do stuff like sitting on a roll for 20 minutes to build that aerobic system up, and then you can go away from it. It's sort of like a good way, I think, to think about it is to go away from, so if you're thinking about strength training, you might go like hypertrophy training into strength training. It's the same thing, I think, for capacity stuff in fitness. You need to go from aerobic into anaerobic training, and then you can kind of phase out your hypertrophy in the same way that you phase out aerobic training.
Yeah.
Especially coming into something like the open, for example. I kind of lost my train of thought halfway through then.
That's all right. That's something that I can work on to when I tell them about how we're actually going to program the cycle.
Yeah.
How we're going to do that.
Yeah. I just think you need to think about the systems that are in place. So you can't just program, okay, the heart rate's going to get up while doing this accessory work, because you need to think about how high their heart rate's getting and what system that's tapping into, and whether if that is having a play on how well they're going to perform in certain length workouts.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
I agree.
Yeah.
I know exactly what you mean.
Supersonic.